I've always believed that life gives you signs when it's time to make a change. For me, that change came in the spring of 2018, when I left behind my cramped one-bedroom apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon, and moved into what I thought would be my dream rental. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old two-story house on the east side of town, tucked into a quiet neighborhood full of maple trees and kids' bikes scattered across front lawns. The rent was surprisingly affordable, especially considering the space: 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and of course, an attic. I figured maybe the house's age explained the price. Still, when I signed the lease, I felt like I'd finally caught a break. After years of noisy neighbors, thin walls, and constant sirens outside my apartment window, this place felt like peace. A place where I could breathe. A place where I could finally be alone. I moved in on a rainy Friday afternoon. Portland rain has this way of making everything feel heavier, more atmospheric. My boxes soaked as I carried them inside, my shoes squeaking against the wooden floors that groaned under each step. The house smelled faintly of cedar mixed with something older like dust sealed into the walls. The landlord was a thin, older man with sharp eyes who seemed in a hurry to leave. He handed me the keys and rattled off the basics. Don't use the fireplace, it doesn't work. Trash pickup is on Tuesdays. The attic is mostly for storage. That last one barely registered with me at the time. The attic. I remember nodding, eager to get him out the door so I could settle in. The first few days were blissful, honestly. I cooked in a real kitchen, sat on my porch with coffee, and enjoyed the sound of rain on the roof without the constant thrum of traffic below me. At night, the neighborhood was so quiet, almost unnervingly so. I could hear owls in the trees, the occasional dog bark, and sometimes the settling groans of the old house. I told myself it was perfect. Of course, looking back now, I can see the warning signs. The way the landlord avoided eye contact when he mentioned the attic. The way the neighbors looked a little too long when they saw me carrying boxes inside. The subtle weight of silence that didn't feel entirely empty. But in that moment, all I felt was relief. Relief that I'd finally found a place I could call my own. I didn't know then that moving into that house would be the worst decision of my life. The first week passed without much incident. I worked my usual shifts downtown, came home to unpack boxes, and spent evenings stretched out on the couch, enjoying the rare quiet. But by the second week, I started noticing little things. At first, it was the sounds. I'd be lying in bed around midnight, just on the edge of sleep when I'd hear it. A faint creak above me. Not the kind of random pop an old house makes when it settles, but something heavier, like a slow, deliberate footstep. The first night I heard it, I froze. My eyes shot to the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat, waiting for the sound again. After a long stretch of silence, I shook it off. Old wood, I told myself. Houses like this shift and groan. The next night it happened again. This time, 2 distinct creaks closer together, almost like someone moving across the attic. I laughed nervously to myself, muttering, probably raccoons. Portland has plenty of them. They get into trash, crawl through gaps in roofs. That had to be it. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I'd never been particularly jumpy, but lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help picturing a pair of eyes just on the other side of it, watching me through the floorboards. A few days later, it wasn't just noises. One morning, I went to make breakfast and noticed something strange. I'd bought a pack of bagels earlier in the week, 6 of them. I distinctly remembered eating 2. But that morning, when I opened the bag, only 2 remained. I stared at it for a long minute, trying to do the math in my head. Did I really eat 4 bagels in 2 days? Maybe I had without realizing. Or maybe I left the bag open and they got moldy and I tossed them out. But I checked the trash. Nothing. I brushed it off. Stress, distraction, moving it made sense I wasn't paying close attention. But then, a couple nights later, something else happened. I came home from work and set my keys on the little dish by the door, like I always did. I went to shower, made dinner, watched TV. Hours later, when I went to grab the keys to lock up, they weren't in the dish. I tore the living room apart: couch cushions, coffee table, even under the rug. Finally, I found them sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. I hadn't put them there. I never put them there. That night, as I lay in bed, the creaks in the ceiling started again, longer this time. like a slow shuffle of weight across the attic floor. I told myself over and over that it was raccoons, that it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But deep down, something in me knew. Something was wrong with that house. By the third week, I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. It wasn't just the bagels or the keys. It was little things, piling up, subtle enough that each one could be explained away, but together it was too much. Like the remote. I always kept it on the coffee table, right in front of the couch. One evening, I sat down to watch TV, and it was gone. I spent 20 minutes searching before I finally found it tucked under the couch cushions, wedged so deep it looked like someone had deliberately stuffed it there. Then there was my toothbrush. One morning, I walked into the bathroom and noticed the bristles were wet. I hadn't brushed yet. I hadn't even turned on the sink. I stared at it for a long time, my stomach twisting. Maybe I'd left it damp the night before. Maybe the faucet dripped. I tried to believe that. I had to believe that. But the worst was when I woke up one night around 2 a.m. and realized my bedroom door was cracked open. I always closed it. Always. But that night, it was open just a sliver, enough that the hallway beyond was visible pitch black, except for the faint orange glow of the streetlight filtering through the front window. I sat there frozen in bed, staring at that gap, listening. The house was silent. No creaks, no footsteps. Just silence so heavy it rang in my ears. After what felt like hours, I forced myself out of bed, crossed the room, and shut the door. I locked it, heart pounding. I told myself I must have left it open by mistake. I told myself a lot of things, but deep down, a thought had started gnawing at me. One I tried to push away every time it surfaced. What if it wasn't raccoons? What if it wasn't me being forgetful? What if someone else was in the house? It was a Wednesday night when everything finally tipped. I'd gone to bed around midnight, the house quiet as always. Rain pattered against the roof, steady and rhythmic, the kind of sound that usually put me to sleep. But that night, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. Creak. Not a random pop, not the shifting of wood. A definite, slow step. My eyes snapped open. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, barely breathing. Then came another creak. Closer. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone or something was walking directly above my bedroom. I sat up in bed, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something, but I couldn't move. My phone was on the nightstand beside me, just inches away, but even reaching for it felt impossible. I was too afraid of making noise. Then I heard it, a faint thud, like something being set down, followed by a sound that made my blood run cold. Breathing, not mine. Not through the walls, above me. Slow, deliberate breaths, filtering down through the thin wooden ceiling. I clamped my hand over my mouth, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. My mind raced. Was it a burglar? A squatter? Had they been up there this whole time? I don't know how long I sat like that, frozen in bed. Minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually the sound stopped. Silence filled the house again, thick and suffocating. When I finally worked up the courage, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept out of bed. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the light steady. I stood at the bottom of the attic ladder in the hallway, staring up. The square panel in the ceiling that led to the attic looked darker than usual, like a black mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I almost pulled the ladder down then and there, but fear paralyzed me. What if I was right? What if someone really was up there? Instead, I retreated to my room, locked the door, and stayed awake until morning, every creak and shadow setting my nerves on fire. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself it was all in my head again. Exhaustion does that to you. You start second-guessing everything. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Something was up there, something real. And eventually, I was going to have to face it. 2 days after that sleepless night, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself if I just checked the attic once, if I proved to myself that nothing was up there, I could move on. I could sleep again. I could stop feeling like a prisoner in my own house. It was a Saturday morning. Sunlight cut across the hardwood floors, warm and harmless, the kind of morning that made you feel silly for being afraid. I stood in the hallway staring up at the attic hatch, heart thudding in my chest. I dragged a chair over and climbed up, fingers trembling as I reached for the string that pulled the ladder down. For a moment, I just stood there, hand hovering, listening. The silence pressed in on me, heavy, expectant. Then I pulled. The ladder creaked as it unfolded, dust raining down around me. The smell hit me first, a sharp, sour odor, like sweat soaked into old clothes. My stomach twisted. I lifted my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it into the darkness above. And that's when I saw it. A thin mattress shoved into the corner, a crumpled blanket, piles of empty water bottles and food wrappers, bagels, granola bars, fast food bags I didn't recognize. But the worst part, scattered across the floor were little scraps of paper, torn notebook pages covered in messy handwriting. At first, I thought they were just notes, but as I angled the light, my blood turned to ice. They were about me. One note wasn't written in words at all. It was a crude drawing me, lying in bed, the outline of my face sketched from above. I staggered back, nearly falling off the ladder. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could move, I heard it. The faint scrape of a footstep. Not in the attic, behind me. I spun around, phone trembling in my hand, the beam of light cutting across the hallway. The air felt suddenly colder, the silence too sharp, too fragile. Someone was in the house, and they weren't in the attic anymore. The sound of that footstep behind me nearly stopped my heart. I whipped the flashlight beam down the hallway, but there was nothing, just the pale wallpaper, the closed bedroom door, the shadows stretching too far across the floor. My throat went dry, my ears strained, desperate for another sound, anything to confirm I wasn't imagining it. And then it came, a soft, slow inhale, the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, thin and pathetic in the silence. I'm calling the police." The only answer was silence, but I knew someone was in there with me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair. My phone shook in my hand as I dialed 911, whispering frantically into the speaker. "There's someone in my house, please. Send help. I think they've been living in my attic." As I spoke, the floorboards groaned. A shadow shifted at the far end of the hall, and then I saw him, a man. Gaunt, filthy, his hair matted into greasy clumps. His clothes were ragged, layered in mismatched fabrics, and his eyes, God, his eyes wide and gleaming like an animal's caught in the light. He didn't run, he didn't lunge. He just stood there, watching me, chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. I froze, clutching my phone so hard my knuckles went white. The man tilted his head, a small, almost curious motion. Then, without a word, he took a step toward me. That broke the spell. I bolted into my bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. My whole body shook as I pressed my back against the door, listening as his footsteps drew closer, slow and deliberate. The doorknob rattled once, then again, harder. My breath came in shallow gasps. "The police are coming," I shouted. "You need to get out." For a moment, everything went still. I thought maybe he'd left. But then, scratch. The sound of fingernails dragging down the wood of my door. Slow, scraping, deliberate. The dispatcher's voice kept talking in my ear, telling me to stay calm, to stay hidden, that help was minutes away. But minutes felt like forever. The scratching stopped. Silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. I couldn't tell if he was still out there, waiting, or if he'd slipped away into another part of the house. Every creak, every tick of the clock, every gust of wind outside made my chest tighten until I thought I'd suffocate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, red and blue lights spilled through the cracks around my curtains. The police. I yanked open the door just as officers stormed through the front entrance, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The man was gone. The police searched the entire house that night. Every room, every closet, even the basement I barely used. They found traces, muddy footprints smeared on the floorboards, empty food wrappers crammed behind furniture, the makeshift bed in the attic. But the man himself? Gone. I sat on the porch steps, shaking under a thin blanket an officer had draped over my shoulders, while red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in sickly flashes. Curious neighbors clustered on the sidewalks, whispering. I kept my head down, too ashamed, too stunned to meet their eyes. One of the officers, a stocky man with tired eyes, crouched in front of me. "You did the right thing calling," he said. "From what we've found, looks like he'd been up there a while." "A while?" I croaked. My throat was raw, dry. "How long?" The officer sighed. "Weeks, maybe longer. There were notes, writings about your routine. He knew your schedule, where you kept your keys, when you slept." My stomach churned. I thought of the toothbrush, the missing food, the door cracked open at night. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "We have an idea. We'll confirm once we pick him up, but they didn't pick him up. Not that night, not the next day, not the next week. They said he was transient, probably homeless, moving through abandoned buildings and houses. He knew how to vanish." I tried to move on. I really did. I scrubbed the house clean, changed the locks, installed cameras, even had the attic entrance nailed shut. But the damage was done. The thought that someone had been watching me, listening to me breathe as I slept, creeping through my rooms when I wasn't home, it ate at me. I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows made my skin crawl. And then, 3 weeks later, I found something that made me realize the nightmare wasn't over. I'd been cleaning under my bed, something I hadn't done since moving in, when my hand brushed against something taped to the underside of the frame, a piece of paper, folded. I pulled it free, heart hammering, and opened it with trembling hands. There were only 5 words, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You shouldn't have told anyone." I sat there on the bedroom floor, the note trembling in my hands. "You shouldn't have told anyone." The words blurred as my vision swam. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the wall, my mind spinning. How? How could he have gotten back in? I had the locks changed. I had cameras installed. I'd been careful, unless he'd never left. The thought rooted itself in my mind like a parasite. What if the police hadn't scared him off? What if he'd just moved deeper into the house, into some crawl space or hidden gap I didn't know about? Watching, waiting. I tore through every room, every closet, every cabinet. I checked behind the washer, under the sink, even the crawl space beneath the house. Nothing. But that didn't calm me. If anything, it made it worse. Because someone had left that note. Someone who knew exactly where I'd find it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes glued to the flickering feed from the security cameras. Hours crawled by. Every time the wind shifted or the house settled, my grip tightened. By morning, I was half crazed with exhaustion. I stuffed the note into an envelope and drove it straight to the police station. They logged it as evidence, but the officer's tone told me everything. They thought I'd done it myself. That stress had gotten the better of me. Maybe they were right, maybe. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling. Sometimes at night, I still wake up and hear it, that faint, deliberate creak above me. Or worse, a slow breath that isn't mine. I don't know if he ever really left. And if you're listening to this thinking it could never happen to you, let me give you one piece of advice. Check your attic.